Okay, I think good morning. Thank you very much, Nigel, for your kind introduction. And I think given that we are in Suriname, I should say a few words in Dutch, right? So, goedemorgen. Het is altijd een genoegen om hier in Suriname te mogen zijn. En misschien vragen jullie af waarom ik Nederlands kan spreken. Omdat ik kom uit Curaçao. Dus vandaar, dus vandaar dat ik ook Nederlands kan spreken. Dus oké, maar ik ga verder zeg maar in het Engels. Okay, what I would like to do today is to talk a bit on what we call community networks. Internet Society is a global organization focusing on three main things. The first one is what we call development of technical standards in order for the internet to function. I think you did hear the previous presentation from my good friend Albert Daniels. He did mention IPv4, IPv6. So all these technical standards were developed by what we call the Internet Engineering Task Force, of which Internet Society is the organizational home. And the second area where we focus a lot on is what we call policy development. When it comes to policy development, it's not only talk about technical matters, but also focusing, for example, on human rights issues and all kinds of other, let's say, not technical challenges. And the third area that Internet Society is quite active on is what we call capacity building and education. We would like to see our own people in the region taking the lead and not always looking to Europe or to USA for us to get assistance. So that is what we are focusing on. And Internet Society is promoting, let's say, what we call access to the internet. It's very nice to talk about internet governance, but if you don't have access to the internet, you don't have anything. So we need to first talk about giving people access to the internet. And this is exactly what I'm going to focus a bit on. If you look globally, still we have 45% of the global population that is not connected to the internet. And it costs a lot not to be connected to the internet. So when you're not connected to the internet, it only makes you, much more poorer. Because those who are connected to the internet, they can make use of all these services, but not only that. Just imagine, for example, if someone doesn't have, let's say, access to the internet, and he or she needs to do, for example, an online transaction. Then he needs to go to a bank. He needs to pay for gas or to bus, use his car or whatever, and then go to the bank, pay a given, let's say, transaction fee, while someone else sitting at home can just do an online banking without costing anything. So the poor will become much more poorer when you are not connected to the internet. So that is why we need to get people connected to the internet. If you look at internet governance, let's say issues or challenges, normally speaking, we are talking about, Nigel already did mention that we are focusing on 7 areas. Back then, we used to focus on 5 areas, but nowadays we are also focusing on security and human rights issues, because these are the things that are relevant nowadays as well. So access is everything. First thing, we need to get people connected to the internet for the reasons that I already did mention. So we need to act now. But especially, and I used to work at a regulator, so I know exactly how it goes, how regulators think, Valini, so I know exactly how you guys think. Regulators think much in a, licensing, let's say, regime. So if you like to do something, you need to have a license. But if we look at the internet governance developments globally, just imagine back then when Mark Zuckerberg had his plan I would like to develop this Facebook thing. He didn't have to go to any regulator to ask them permission to do what he wanted to do. I'm not saying, and I'm not promoting chaos, but one of the things that we have seen with the internet is that we can use our imagination, our minds, or whatever, to develop new things. So it doesn't matter where you live. If you live in the Caribbean, in Africa, or whatever, that's not important. As long as you have a good idea, you can work on that to get things done. But again, first we need to give this community access to the internet. So what we're trying to do at Internet Society is to focus a lot on this. To focus on what we call connecting community. Community networks, mostly deployed by wireless technologies. This is not the only solution to the access problem, but it is one way how we can get, let's say, communities connected in a very easy way to the internet. So what are community networks basically? Whenever we are talking about the community network, we are talking about a network that is being operated by a local group or citizens. So in a given, let's say, village, city, or town. And our focus is especially on rural areas. So we're not competing with existing operators. If I look here in this room, for example, we are not talking here about replacing what Telesur, and I'm looking at my good friend there from Telesur, is doing. We are talking about if there is a rural area where no one is interested in giving them a particular telecommunication service, then that particular community can come together, because at a given time, I mean, we need to find ways how we can, or we should, help ourselves. It's not always that others are going to help us. So we need to find ways how we can help ourselves. And this whole, let's say, community network approach, this is the same thing. So you have a given village, they don't have access to the internet. Maybe it is very expensive for, let's say, existing operators to deploy telecommunication infrastructure in that particular area. And then these persons, they come together, they start discussion, how can we get our community connected to the internet? And here you can find organizations such as ours, Internet Society, and others trying to help them how to deploy these networks. And again, this is a collaboration effort. So we need to work also with let's say, existing, let's say, operators, especially when you're dealing with one of the challenges that we are facing, for example, a backhaul. So how do you get people connected to the internet? Then you need to use existing operators, because it's very easy to just, let's say, deploy a wireless infrastructure somewhere in the jungle or somewhere. But if you don't have connectivity, what we call the backhaul to the infrastructure, then we don't have anything. And here we can, and we are using, let's say, are working with existing operators. One of the others, let's say, spin-off effects that we have seen, especially with community networks. I didn't mention it, but later on, maybe I'm going to focus a bit more on that. We have been doing a lot of, let's say, community networks especially in India. And right now, here in the Caribbean, I'm trying to promote it a bit more as well. And we do have some countries where I think we can deploy these initiatives. So what we have seen, just imagine, for example, in a rural area, these persons, they don't have access to the internet. And then we will see some local initiatives going on. We have even seen, for example, people that, let's say, who didn't, buy, let's say, these antennas, but these antennas were built by themselves. So because they wanted to be connected to the internet. So they find, let's say, smart ways how to be engaged in all the processes in order for them to get connected to the internet. And one very important thing is, let's say, training. So we are working with partners all around the globe who are, let's say, focusing on, let's say, sponsorship. We can get, let's say, equipment from them, and also experts who have been deploying these networks all around the globe. We are working together with them in order for us to get these community networks going on. Again, this is not about replacing existing operators. I would like to stress on this, because I recall in one particular presentation, in one particular country in the Caribbean, someone came to me and said, okay, so you would like to replace us? I said, no, we would like to work with you guys. We are not talking about replace you guys, because you do have the infrastructure, and especially when it comes to backhaul, as I did mention before, we need to work with all of you in order for us to do this. And if you are deploying, let's say, community networks already in rural areas, there is no need to do that. Remember, we have 45% of the global community that still is not connected to the internet. So our focus is, how can we use smart ways? This is community network, but it could be something else as well, to get people connected to the internet. And one of the things that we are trying to do is not simply to get people connected to the internet, but we would like to see a more, what we call, development of the economy in a given country. Most of the times, us from this part of the world, let's say, I'm talking now for the Caribbean, Latin America, most of the times we are just users. We are using systems that were developed by other persons around the globe. But we are not stupid neither. We can think as well. So we should start thinking, how can we also develop systems, let's say, for our communities, and let them, I'm talking now about the North and also to Europe, for example, and let them use our systems. Why is that not possible? It is possible. If you look, and I don't want to be a lot philosophical right now, but if you look, for example, at the human brain, I didn't know that, but I did read about it, and it seems like all the brains of the human beings, they have the same size, and it doesn't matter how big your head is or not. all the brains, they have the same size. And what does this mean? For me, when I did read about this, it means something to me very, very special. Because sometimes we think some people in certain parts of the world, they are excluded from doing things. But the supreme being there, you may call it what you want, gave all of us the same size of our brains. So that means all of us can think as well, you know? So it doesn't matter where you are, just think about it. So this is exactly what we're doing. So once you get people connected to the internet, and then we can start focusing on education. We can get people, people are very happy once they are connected to the internet, because they can also participate at the global economy. The Internet Society, for example, has been promoting community networks since 2010. And one of the things that we have seen back then, globally, you had a lot of, let's say, persons institutions, and others, in one way or the other, they were focusing on community networks, but we didn't have, let's say, one overarching, let's say, entity that was coordinating what all these groups were doing. So what internet society has been doing is to put them together, to put all these groups together, put them in the same room, and let they discuss how we can make this thing better. So we are supporting, let's say, others who are deploying, let's say, community networks. And again, the focus is not on community networks. The focus is on how can we get people connected to the internet. And community networks is just one way how we can achieve that. We have been working with a lot of, let's say, partners all around the globe, because this is something that you cannot do by yourself. So you need to work with others. We do have just a few new partners right now in Zimbabwe, in Africa, Argentina, and Kyrgyzstan. And we do have in this part of the world also some partners in Brazil, Colombia, and Mexico. So there are some barriers to community networks as well. One of those is mostly when it comes to, and I'm looking now in the direction of regulators, for example. And as I did mention, I used to work at the regulator, so I know exactly how it goes. When we talk about community networks, we are using, let's say, the wireless spectrum. So we are using spectrum. So you need to have frequencies. And especially given that spectrum is a very scarce resource, and there are fees attached to it, especially when it comes to governments, you may have a challenge there, because they may say, okay, you're trying to compete, or jeopardize my revenues by just deploying community networks somewhere. But again, we need to find smart ways how we can do this, and governments can help as well. They can maybe reduce taxes on equipment, focus on some what we call smart licensing, let's say, approaches, and financing also some other equipment, and so on and so on. So I did more or less touch base on this. Let's say, what governments can do. They can focus on tax and fee exemption, easing, let's say, regulatory requirements, and expanding universal service and other funding opportunities. Back then, especially in the telecommunication environment, globally, and I think here in the Caribbean as well, in Latin America, a lot of these regulators and other, let's say, government bodies, they have been collecting a lot of money with respect to universal service funds. And so the money is there. And sometimes they don't know exactly how to deal with this, because they have that money. It was collected back then for promoting universal services, but in one way or the other, they were not able to use these funds. So the money is there. So this is also what we can do to talk with governments and to see how we can, let's say, deploy, especially community networks. And again, when I'm talking about community networks, I'm focusing on rural areas. So especially where existing operators don't want to invest for so many reasons. So policymakers, there are a few approaches that they can, let's say, apply. For example, they can streamline or eliminate, let's say, regulatory requirements that are not applicable to small community-based networks. So you may have a big, let's say, from the regulatory let's say, perspective, you may have some, let's say, licensing approaches for operators. But if you have a small group in a jungle, are you going to apply that same principle to that small group of 50 persons who would like to get access to the internet? I'm not sure about that. So these are things that at least we need to talk about. I don't have all the answers as yet, but at least we need to talk about. And if we are focusing on how can we help the unconnected, just think about this village in the jungle with 60, 70, 80, 100 persons living there who do not have connectivity to the internet. And if you just think about them, and then I think we will find smart solutions to solve their problem. And not only looking at, okay, this is what the law is saying, this is what the act is saying. Yes, of course. That act, law, everything was drafted, and sometimes not taking into consideration those small groups that are left behind. So our focus should be how can we help those who are unconnected. And again, if they are not connected to the internet, life will become much more difficult for them because everything will become much more expensive to them. So here are, I mean, you guys will get this, this presentation. So here are some approaches that you can think about. We just released, Internet Society just released a paper last week on, let's say, some smart licensing approaches. So I would like to invite, let's say, the regulators who are here in the room to just take a look at it. You can just Google it, Internet Society, smart ways of develop community networks, and you can get that, that paper over there. So let me focus on a bit on some, let's say, real life examples that we have had so far. For example, we had in Tushiti, Georgia, and not to confuse the Georgia with the state Georgia in the US. This is a country close to the Russian republics, Chechnya and Dagestan. So in Tushiti, Georgia, we had, let's say, our local chapter of Internet Society working with local authorities, with governments, and with support from Internet Society. They decided to connect a rural area in this particular country. And if you can see here, this is a real life example. You see all these horses over here. This is a very mountainous area. So they had to use these horses to carry, let's say, all these antennas above these mountains to get them installed. So it works. And people in that area, they are very happy right now because if it wasn't for, let's say, this approach, community network approach, then they would have never, let's say, got, let's say, connection to the internet. Because the existing operator wasn't really, I would not say interested, maybe able to deploy, let's say, infrastructure for that community, because maybe it would be too expensive for them, you know. But with a local initiative, they were able to do it. So in order for this to happen, all of us should be looking in the same direction, as I did mention before. So it's not about, again, about competing with existing operators. It's about how can we work together to make this thing happen. And always taking into consideration this particular group that doesn't have connectivity to the internet. So if you focus on that, I think we will reach agreement. We need to focus especially on policies, processes, and partnerships. Sometimes, as I did mention before as well, we do have some policies in place that are quite old or not really applicable nowadays. Processes, most of the times very bureaucratic when it comes to governments. So we need to sit together, put everybody in a room and see how we can solve these challenges. We have some other initiatives going on as well, for example, in Kyrgyzstan. So these are real life examples going on where internet society, together with local partners, governments, are focusing on community networks. Another one is in Zimbabwe, in Africa, where we have a community of 10,000, let's say, people, whereby we are deploying right now a community network as well. And again, what we have seen in all these areas, all these communities, the local operator was not able, I'm not saying willing, was not able, maybe due to all kinds of challenges, to deploy that network. So the community came together and they were discussing how can we help ourselves, given that they are not going to help us. And this is what they have been doing. So we have another real life example in Zimbabwe. We have also one going on right now in Argentina with small community of 150 to, let's say, 400 inhabitants. And sometimes for an operator, if you have to cover, those of you who are acquainted with Argentina, is a very, very large country. So maybe it's not commercially seen. It's not, let's say, it's a challenge for the operator to deploy a network over there. So that is why community again came together to see how can we solve our own problem. And I did put one here. The next flagship community network that I would like to see, as my personal goal, is in one of these 4 countries. Because if you look at Suriname, I'm sure Suriname has also these, let's say, jungle, where you have all rural areas. The same is true for Guyana, Belize, and in Haiti as well. And in one of these 4 countries, I'm not mentioning which one, right now we are discussing with them not only to, let's say, to deploy a community network, but to use, let's say, if I give too much detail, you would think which country. I didn't want to do that right now. But to use, let's say, persons in that country to conduct, let's say, businesses as well. Maybe you'll figure out what is fine. In one of these 4 countries, traditionally, persons from that country, they have been doing, let's say, business across the Caribbean. They have been, let's say, going to Panama, to Curacao, and to other, let's say, countries to buy stuff from the free zone, and then go back to their own country and to sell this stuff. So if we can give them access to the internet, so that's the first thing that they need. If we can give them access to the internet, and then after that, teach them how to use the internet and to develop, let's say, e-commerce based platforms in order for them to sell their goods, then we can help them. And then little by little, they will become much more independent of others, and they can earn their own income. So these are the things that we are doing. I did mention a few, let's say, global examples that we have, but right now we are focusing on the Caribbean as well. And I'll be happy to continue discussing with you how we can make this happen. And again, this is not about replacing existing operators, because in no way are we focusing on that. It's more how can we work with them, work with existing operators, especially in areas where they are not able to deploy, let's say, access to the community. So that's one thing, one ask that I have. I would like to ask you all to help us, let's say, to think how can we make this thing better, because we don't have all the answers as yet. It's work in progress. So let's discuss it and see how we can make it happen, and always focus on those who do not have access to the internet. Maybe we do have it, but just think on those who do not have it. And if we use this as a point of departure, and then I think we can reach agreement on that. So met dat, ik bedank u voor uw aandacht. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Shernon. I have a question in terms of the partnerships you talk about. Is it that Internet Society actually involved in making these partnerships for community networks?
Say the last part.
Is it that Internet Society is actually involved in the partnerships for community networks? And if I know in Suriname here and Guyana, there are some challenges for connectivity in the interior. How might they be able to follow this idea? Is it through you?
Yes. Basically, if you look at this slide, for example, that's why I did mention, please help us to think how we can make this happen. We do have, let's say, global partners right now. So global partners that we are working with. But we would like to have also, let's say, local and regional partners. For example, a lot of people, I know, in one way or the other, Albert, in one way or the other, people like to travel. I don't know why, because sometimes it's not fun. If I just look at my own example coming here, it's fine to be in Suriname, don't get me wrong on that. But I live in Curacao, and as you may know, we had Insulair, so they no longer fly to Suriname. And just before I came here, Suriname Airways canceled all flights out of Curacao and also Trinidad and Tobago. So it was a challenge to reach here, So it took me 17 hours to reach here, to cover like, I think, less than 2,000 kilometers, So given that I want to come, I'm happy to be here. I like your food. so okay, but that is why we would like to have, let's say, local and regional partners as well. We already do have global. And okay, the reason I'm mentioning this, people, and especially these partners, people like to travel. In one way or the other, people like to travel and to go to other places. So we have a lineup of people, of persons willing to come. And I think especially if you mention them coming to Caribbean, those kind of things, they're much easier they're willing to come. So, and they're willing to share their knowledge, their expertise, to help others to deploy these networks. So we do have a lineup of, let's say, experts, global experts that are willing, but we do have our own, and this is what I'm stressing on, we have our own local and regional experts as well. And we would like to make use of these experts as well. And again, it's not competing. I keep stressing on this. It's not competing with existing operators. It's just complementing what existing operators are doing. So to answer your question, yes, we are partnering, and we are looking for other partners.
What is the main issue at this moment that you see? What is the main issue that you see for Suriname to get this ball rolling?
Wilt u het antwoord in Nederlands of nee? Is goed. Is gewoon, oké. I think Suriname, and if you look at Suriname, and I compared a bit with Guyana as well, because you guys do have, let's say, all these rural areas. I think the main, let me use the word challenge, that I think is how we can work, for example, put everybody together. And I'm talking here about, for example, I have good friends at Telesur. I know them quite well. But that is why I'm saying this is not competing with existing operators. Because I don't want, let's say, existing operators to think these guys are coming, trying to replace our network or to deploy, you know. That's not what we're talking about. And if there is an area where, let me mention, for example, Telesur, because we are here in Suriname, zoals jullie zeggen. Also, given that we're here in Suriname, if they are deploying a given infrastructure in a given area, that's fine. We don't have an issue with that, you know. But if it is not being deployed in certain areas, and then let's see how we can make it happen. So the challenge would be to put everybody together, to convince them that we are not enemies, and like that. And then if we can work with the government, with the regulator, with the operator, with a local community that we are trying to serve as well, if we can put everybody together in a room, and then I think we can reach agreement and solve that problem. Let me go Carlton and then our friends over here. Do we have a microphone?
Yes, I am particularly interested in this idea of community networks. And it starts basically with empowering people at the edge to get connected. I'll give you a specific situation that I know of in Suriname. Years ago, I was working on a project here. Winston, remember this, Winston, of research and education networks. And we were concerned about how we would get strands of rural communities connected to the network. This is for education now and research. And there was a community way in the interior, what we call Maroon community. And one of the things that they were doing is that a very formidable lady, I can't remember her name now, who had a small installation of an internet connection, and they were using 12-volt batteries to power and radios to get connection and power it using GPRS at the time. Okay, and that was quite instructive. One of the things what we wanted to do was that they could make more of what they had. What they had right now was one machine connected to the battery with a modem. But if they had a community network built around that, they could have spread the signal to others in the area. And people had one or two smartphones, believe it or not, but they only use when they come in near where they have connectivity. If we had a community network, we could have added a lot more folks to the signal, and we would have empowered people to use the internet for learning and research and so on, which is what we were concerned about. And it is just one example of how community networks can work and empower people without actually impacting negatively the existing suppliers. As a matter of fact, you need them as part of the solution.
Yes.
And that's one of the things I would encourage all of you to think about community networks, empowering community networks. There are several ways you can do that. You have to look at the regulations, for example, for spectrum management. and so on. But it is possible, and it works, and you can do it. Thanks.
Thanks, Carlton, for your comments. And then Deidre.
Yes, I think it was the first hobby project I did in Suriname was set up a community network.
Oh, congratulations.
I think the challenges are a bit different because most of my equipment got confiscated and I got called to law, etc., etc. We have these ITU bands we license out, and I think that's the biggest problem because technology now you can make a 150-mile link with a almost consumer-grade wireless unit. I think some companies in Suriname did that to Guyana, as I know of. Also got confiscated. But fact of the matter is, there's a legal gap there we have to resolve. We even did an antenna on a weather balloon test already, but it's still illegal in our country to perform activities on a 2.4 gigahertz. And that's a big disadvantage because in America you can do what you want.
It's let me put the record straight again. If you recall what I said when I started my conversation, I'm not promoting anything against the law here. This is one of the first things that I said. And I used to work at the regulator as well, and I know exactly how it goes. You did mention, for example, in the US, you can do everything that you want. That's not true neither, because you have, for example, licensed and you have unlicensed bands. Even in the unlicensed bands, you are not allowed to use a given amount of power, you know? Yes. So they are, what we're trying to do, that's why I'm saying, if you do your thing by yourself, of course you will get yourself in the problem. But what we are promoting is to come together, collaboration, governments, regulators, and it is not, let's say, our problem. It's not a problem of one particular person or stakeholder. But if you just imagine what could happen if you put, let's say, all these stakeholders together in a room, the operator, governments, regulator, not to forget civil society, all of them together, and put pressure on them. This thing should have been done, for example, by an operator. If that was the case, then we would not have been here in the room talking about this. But given that this is not the case, that is why we are here in the room. So let's discuss how can we solve this challenge for this particular group that is living in the jungle who do not have access to the internet. And then we will reach agreement. We have seen some previous example, for example, in Argentina and in Georgia as well. This was the approach. It was not something just you coming here in the jungle, put your antenna. No, of course, you're asking for a problem. We need to come together, all together in a given room, discuss it, and say, okay, this is the challenge that we are facing. How are we going to solve this problem? And then of course, we will reach agreement. So that would be the approach that I would like to suggest. Come together, collaboration, and then that is why I did mention, let's say, smart licensing as well. Because if you just hold to, let's say, the traditional way of licensing, of course, you would say, no, okay, this is not something that we can do. But if you think of smart ways, and then we will reach agreement. Up to the moderator, yes.
As well as the legal difficulties, there are often financial difficulties, and I wondered how much ISOC is looking at the universal service funds where they exist, because those already are involve these various different stakeholders working together. The money is collected that way. How it is used is the prescription has not always been written very well, but does that come into
Yes.
your plan?
Yes, I will answer very, very short because I see the moderators already here. What I would like to say, come together in the room. come together, and then we will discuss that, and then we will reach agreement on that issue as well.
Yes, thank you. I think there's a common misconception between what the situation was a few years ago and what it is now, because I have information that Telesur is now on the verge of connecting almost 80% of populated Suriname with the internet, with mobile communications. And by 2020, about 90% of all communities, even in the interior, will be connected by the network. So I think one option is to really connect with Telesur again and see how that effort can be supported. It is an effort that has been initiated by the government through Telesur within the Telesur licensing and data network expansion project. And I think that with the efforts from the Internet Society and within the expertise and funding capabilities, I think that before 2020 or even after 2020, between 2022 or something, we can have 100% coverage of all living communities.
Yes.
So that's just a suggestion
Yes.
from my stance.
Yes, thanks. Just Nigel, just for me 1 second. Congratulations with that approach. If you remember, I focused, let's say, on community networks, generally speaking, and then I mentioned a few countries where I think we can focus a bit on. So if Suriname is, let's say, focusing on that, we would be happy also to be, collaborating with you in that regard to maybe to make things maybe go a bit more faster, if we can use that word. So I think it's always good to collaborate because we can reach further then. Okay, thanks.